Hello, everyone. We're still going through what it means to rest. This is the second podcast. Hopefully, you listened to the first one. It was called Is This Something? That sets the scene for what we're talking about. One of the most difficult things we have to do in our restless, busy society is to learn how to rest, especially with the religious background that we've all been given. To learn how to rest is so difficult. When I was a child, I had a teacher who delighted in shaming and hurting children. I went to a Christian high school. Most of the teachers were Bob Jones graduates or of that caliber. This one particular teacher would give us a list of spelling words or other assignments. We would learn from the blueback speller, of course. That was the holy one. We had to memorize the spelling of those words. I was always good at memorization, so read through it once or twice and I'd have it. There would be about 25 words on the list. The day came for the test. The teacher would read the word out loud. We'd all write it down and spell it correctly. But if we missed a certain number of words, say 7 or 8, the teacher would bring us before the class in front of everyone and tell us to assume the position, which was bent over, grabbing our ankles, and he would give us a swat in front of the whole class. As I said, I was good at memorization, and I never was a poor student, so I didn't have to suffer the degradation of having a swat for failing an exam. I got the swat for not sitting in my chair properly or other things. But I learned the lesson. Failing a spelling test only happens if you're lazy. And if you're lazy, you need to be motivated. And to be motivated, shame and physical pain are the best way to go about doing it. In my child's mind, the lesson that I learned was this. Lazy and stupid people deserve to be mocked and beaten. And so my whole life I worked very hard to not be lazy or stupid. As a child, I didn't know about dyslexia or learning disabilities. I know that there was 1 or 2 kids in particular that never passed a spelling test. They got swats every single time any test or quiz was administered. The teacher in the class would joke about it. He would say things like, "Okay, everyone, let's exchange papers and grade them so we can give Bill his swat." There was a large part of me that withered inside for Bill. He would laugh it off generally. He'd give a big hoot and holler every time he got his swat. He'd try to preserve his dignity. The human heart always resists degradation as much as it can. But he would fail the next quiz the same way that he failed every quiz. I'd wither inside a little bit. Outwardly, I played along, and far too often I would join in. I tried to fit in to avoid the pain of being ostracized. And far too often I would pride myself on my intelligence and diligence and skill, which enabled me to avoid being publicly humiliated like that. But my natural ability to memorize words wasn't anything that I did. I wasn't a harder worker than anyone else there. It didn't occur to me that some kids might work for hours and hours and hours sweating over each word and still would never be able to pass a spelling test because I didn't have that problem. I could read the list, picture it in my mind, and go out and play. It'd take me about 15 minutes. I was good to go. I never gave it much thought at all, except that I would wither inside a little bit every time Bill was called to the front of the class for his daily swat. His teacher, they called Mr. Mack, had a paddle that he used that he carved himself. He called it Big Mac. On the back side of it, he would write the name of each person that received a swat during the year, and he would tally how many swats each kid received, and then he would display that paddle in the auditorium at the end of the year programs so that everyone could see who received the swats. I'm astounded that parents were apparently okay with it. I'm still astounded that there are Christian schools who still believe that's a good thing. And they talk about the evils of the secular government who forbids biblical child raising by forbidding parents to torment the children. I could say something foolish like, our teacher paddled us every time we failed a quiz and we turned out just fine. Except I know we didn't turn out just fine, did we? We turned out traumatized, fearful, ashamed, afraid to take a day off. Bad kids deserve to be beaten and shamed. Kids that miss a day because they are sick deserve to get beaten and shamed. Kids that ask for days off or who don't finish projects on time or who don't climb to the top deserve to be shamed and beaten. We give it a fancy name. We call it a meritocracy. Those with merit are the ones that should be promoted, and those that aren't should be shamed and beaten. And so we're anxious, we're stressed, we're locked into jobs we hate, we're abused at work, we're shamed in church, and then we turn around and shamed our spouses and our kids in return. Because it's gone into our heads, a whole generation. Lazy kids deserve to be beaten. To quote Pink Floyd from my generation, when we were young and went to school, there were certain teachers who would hurt the children any way they could. But in the town it was well known when they got home at night, their fat and psychopathic wives would thrash them within inches of their lives. I take some pleasure in reminding myself that this teacher would most likely be jailed for the same kind of behavior today. I steadfastly will and always will resist any sort of statement that these were the good old days that we should somehow return to. In many ways, our society has greatly improved. The Mr. Macs of this world are no longer as ubiquitous as they were when I was a child. At least he isn't abusing openly with glee. But to be honest, my generation is carrying the scars, as my classmates can attest. Those who demand that we make America great again generally tend to be the Mr. Mac types, who are angry because they are no longer allowed to exert their filthy control over innocent children anymore. But that isn't what this blog is about. This blog is about what we learned as children. We called it the Protestant work ethic. And it boils down to this: lazy children deserve everything they get. And the results are that we work every day of our lives. We're resistant to taking any time to rest. We drive ourselves into the grave working at home, working at jobs we hate, so that we won't be found short when the exam time comes. We only buy our children educational toys. We only allow them to do things that are educational. We don't allow them to play. Because lazy and stupid children deserve to be beaten. And we take that and we put it into our relationship with God. We thunder from the pulpits that we have to work hard enough to prove that we are really worthy of God's love for us. Our prayers sound like, forgive me for missing my alarm and sleeping in. Forgive me for not being able to face another day. Forgive me that my legs gave out and I couldn't march anymore. I tried to get up at 4:30 in the morning to pray, but I just couldn't do it. I hope God will forgive me and bless me anyway. There's a novella written by Stephen King that stuck with me for years called The Long Walk, where children, for reasons not explained to them, get up and walk and walk and walk, and if they fall, they're shot. And the last one standing gets some sort of prize that he no longer cares about. The reason that it works so powerfully on the consciences of men is that we were created moral creatures. We were created to till the ground and keep the garden and fellowship with God. We were created that we might know God, heartily praise Him, and glorify Him forever. We were created with the ability to make moral choices, and those moral choices are woven into creation by our good God. He called creation very good. It was orderly. There is a natural order to the world. Objects fall to the ground at predictable rates. The organs of a horse are in the same spot in every horse. That's why veterinarians can do their job. You can predict that a rabbit will eat greenery rather than a nice steak. If there were no natural order, as long been said, we could not do science at all. There is a natural order. There's also a natural moral order. God told Adam that the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden was forbidden to him. It's impossible for Adam to live if he's disobedient to God, for God is life and cannot contradict himself. Outside of God's favor, only death awaits. And that moral order is seen in every endeavor where choices are involved. It's impossible to say what that would have looked like before the fall because we don't live in that world anymore. We all have experience of it after the fall. If a man curses and rails at his wife, his home life will suffer. If a man doesn't show up to work, his boss will eventually fire him. If a man is an adulterer, he will be despised by all. If a man is a reviler, he will not get invited to parties. And if a man refuses to work, he won't prosper economically. This is human behavior and living in society with other humans. The variations are endless. Some people get away with lawlessness. Other times they do not. But moral order can't be avoided. It's woven into the fabric of creation. This is what gives power to men like Mr. Mack, my childhood teacher. We know instinctively that we ought to study. We desire to do good on tests and receive praise from men. Children don't want to be shamed in front of their class. And wicked men exploit that moral order in the universe in order to exert their power and control over the image bearers of God. And it certainly is powerful. But the fact is, after the fall, if God operated the universe on strict moral order, which he must, for he created them, he called them very good and cannot deny himself. The fact is, though, that if God did that, none of us would be alive today. Adam was told that if he ate the fruit, he would die. He ate the fruit, but he didn't die, because God intervened with what C.S. Lewis calls deeper magic in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Satan uses that moral order and that attribute of God to pit God against himself. If God doesn't bring immediate justice, then God is not just and is not good. But if God does bring immediate justice, we're all destroyed. This is why we can't rest. We keep thinking that we're going to overcome the justice of God by working harder. That's what Paul calls the law or the flesh. If we do more, then God will bless us. But for us to learn how to rest, we have to learn what the gospel is. It'll affect how we work, how we live, how we love, how we raise our children, and everything that we do. It's called the gospel, the good news. It's the proclamation that Jesus Christ has come and defeated our enemy, sin and death and misery, in a way that we could not possibly fathom. He made something out of nothing. He can do that. He's the creator. Remember, he spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. Romans 4 says God brings the dead to life and calls into existence the things that don't exist. He looks at the scattered and the outcast and the Gentiles and those who are not his people, and he says, "You are my people." People like you and me, disobedient sinners, strangers to the promise, aliens in a land that isn't ours. Just like he looked at childless Abraham and said, "You are the father of many nations." He looks at the broken and the bloody and the wounded and the outcast, and he says, "Live," and calls us his bride. He found us as an aborted baby cast away to die, found us in our blood, as Ezekiel says, and says, "Live." The book of Ecclesiastes reminds us of vanity to keep us grounded. Quit calling those things that are nothing as if they are something. As I said last week, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. We aren't God. We can't create something out of nothing. And too often we think of something as success. Success in life in terms of things under the sun. We do that even in the church. Success is measured in numbers and programs and influence and power, and all the children sitting in neat little rows, not making any noise and not swinging their feet. Of proper mothers baking bread and jam and sewing their own dresses. And Solomon said, all is nothing. The disciples made that same mistake once. Jesus sent them out to preach the gospel, and they cast out demons. They came back rejoicing and praising God. "Look at the power we have over demons," they said. And Jesus said this, "Behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. Nothing shall hurt you. But don't rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you. Rejoice because your names are written in heaven. For under the sun, all is vanity. Even any blessings that God may give our homes or our church, those are ultimately vanity. It's not a mark of despair. It's a great hope. As our affections are lifted upward to where our names are written in heaven. And the preacher in Ecclesiastes reminds us that our home isn't here. Our treasure isn't here. The things that we long for aren't here. And yes, under the sun, we've been given our tasks to do, neighbors to love, work to accomplish, wives to kiss. We've been given food and shelter and sometimes good days and also many dark days. Under the sun, we toil. Our toil is useless and without end and without hope under the sun. The statues fall down. The dollar stores fade into ruin. And yet through our labor, through that toil and labor of our souls, the shepherd calls us and says, "Come unto me, all that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus gives rest. On the seventh day, God stopped his work and said, "Behold, it is very good." And the whole point of creation was to call us into that rest and say with God, "Behold, it is very good." But we're too busy about ships and sails and sealing wax and castles and kingdoms. We're too busy building statues and dollar stores. We're too busy beating children to get them to work harder. We can't see it. Even the so-called gospel, as is most likely preached today, is almost always preached about more work. Here's what you do. Let's work harder. Let's do more stuff, more vanity, more air, more striving for the wind. As many can attest, you don't often find rest at the foot of a modern preacher. But Jesus came that we might walk with him into the throne room of God himself, and when we are there, we will know what it means to rest. That's a journey in this blog in the next few episodes I want to take you on. I want to show you those green pastures and still waters that only Jesus can lead you to. And to do that, I'm going to take rather an odd route. First, I'm going to take you to the Exodus from Egypt. And then I'm going to take you through a dinner that Jesus was invited to. We read about that dinner in Luke 14. And I will call you to use your imagination and sit at that table where Jesus sat and hear what he has to say, so that you will learn how to rest. We read in the very first verse that it was the Sabbath day. And so in order to understand that meal, we have to understand the Sabbath. The Sabbath is an important detail. It's the center of it all. And to understand the Sabbath, I'm going to take you back to Egypt, and we'll talk about the slaves and the Exodus. But that's next time. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Take a few minutes today to rest. Goodbye.